Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Bring the World Home, production of the Return Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. Each week, we explore the experiences and understandings gained by a volunteer who served in one of the 132 countries around the world in which the Peace Corps serves. Today we have with us Zach
McNish.
Zach McNish is a fine young man that I've been having a great conversation with here, and we welcome you to Bring the World Home. We hope that you'll enjoy our short time with us today. Zach was a volunteer in Panama from 1999 to 2002. And as we always do, we like to refer to our globe here. We're out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And halfway across the world is the Isthmus of Panama. And pretty interesting place from what little I know about it.
It is.
You were there at a time of change. I believe in the late 90s, Panama Canal was turned over from the Western control, if you will, to the Panamanians. Is that right?
Yeah.
But before we get too far, I'd like to explore one of our missions here and Bring the World Home is to stimulate and inform people of how to become a volunteer, how to become a Peace Corps volunteer specifically, but hopefully your experience will help them explore the idea of volunteerism in the first place. You're a young man, you must be in your mid-20s or early 30s, and how did you come to know about Peace Corps? How did you get interested in volunteering with the Peace Corps in the first place?
Well, my father was a Peace Corps volunteer who served in Peru in 1970 to 1972. And so growing up, I had always heard stories of the Peace Corps and the friends he'd made there, the sort of the work that he did, and just a whole bunch of great stories about it.
Positive spin on the eye.
Definitely. And I was getting ready to graduate from college and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I saw a bunch of my friends going off to work on Wall Street or do office jobs, and that didn't really appeal that much. And
what were you studying in college?
I studied history, U.S. history.
Oh.
And although I was born and raised here and went to college on the mainland, I hadn't traveled outside of the country at all, actually. While growing up or in college or anything, and wanted to sort of see the world and do something exciting and sort of try to make a difference.
Did the idea come to you on your own, or your dad said, "Hey, if you hadn't figured out what to do, why about the Peace Corps?"
No, I don't think he really encouraged me to do the Peace Corps. I mean, I think although he had a great experience, my parents were sort of wanted me to make my own choices and do my own thing. And the Peace Corps recruiter came to campus, and I went to the presentation. It sounded great.
Yeah.
I talked to my parents, and they encouraged me, and sort of away I went.
Well, that's not atypical way to get involved in Peace Corps. That's exactly how I did. I saw Peace Corps recruiters on campus. They were recruiting for Micronesia, and I said, "Oh, that's very interesting." I never even thought much about it. And here in Hawaii, we have a great resource with University of Hawaii's Office of Peace Corps, an office that handles Peace Corps matters and recruitment. Anyways, so you applied to Peace Corps. Did you apply for a specific area, a country?
I applied for the Latin America region, and I'd had some Spanish in high school, so it seemed a little more familiar.
Yeah.
And growing up in Hawaii, I sort of thought, well, I've sort of seen the Pacific a little bit, and Africa was a little scary, so so the Americas seemed like a
Good
safer
place
bet.
to land, sure.
And they chose the country. I said I sort of wanted to be in a rural area if possible, so they gave me an agricultural program.
they notified you that you were inviting you to go to
Panama.
Panama, and what? Obviously, you must have known about Panama. What?
I mean, I knew about Panama. I sort of knew that there was a canal there. Honestly, I actually didn't know much else about it at the time. Although my mother had lived in Panama for a year, teaching English for one of the fruit companies when she was, I guess, about my age, in her late 20s. So I knew just the tiniest bit about Panama. So it was definitely a wonderful learning experience too.
We go through the standard training. Did you train
Yes.
totally in country, or did you?
Totally in country. So 3 months in country.
You got there, and you were assigned to what kind of work?
The program was called agroforestry when I first started, and while during the course of my service, the program changed into a permaculture program. So similar, sort of more of a renaming of what we were actually doing.
Agroforestry, does that mean you're growing trees, or?
It means that you're growing trees and crops in some sort of a combination.
Okay.
So whether that's a temporal connection, whether you're planting trees and then growing crops underneath them while the trees are growing, or whether it's in a sort of a more, trees here and then crops side by side with them, and the crops get some benefit from having the trees there, and the trees get some benefit from having the crops there. So either a spatial or a temporal relationship between the agroforestry is an idea that's been around for thousands of years, really, but in its sort of present form for 50 or 60 years. And I didn't have all that much agricultural experience. I studied American history in college. My dad had a garden. That was sort of the extent of it. And
that's what Peace Corps does, stretches the envelope for
exactly.
us volunteers.
And so Peace Corps had a great library, a lot of books, and I sort of attacked it actually from a sort of a intellectual standpoint, just trying to figure out everything I could about agriculture, about forestry, about agroforestry.
What kind of, okay, so the country, Panama, invited the Peace Corps to supply volunteers to work in this field.
Yes.
And did they have a specific program? Did they, being either Panama or Peace Corps, have a specific job description and stuff they wanted you to accomplish, or?
Yeah, they did, and it sort of depended from location to location. The country had requested general support in this area, and then...
So you weren't the only
No, there were
volunteer.
There were 6 others in my training group of 30 that were going to be in agroforestry, and then maybe 20 other volunteers already serving in that sector who were in country at the time.
So it was a trial by fire, totally, then.
Right, exactly. So I got to learn from other volunteers.
And then, were you implementing a program that somebody
and so
had already started, or you were asked to go to a new area and start a brand new program?
No, I was continuing. There had been a volunteer living in the site that I was in for about, I guess he'd been there for about a year and a half, and he left. There was a little bit of a lag, and then I stepped in and sort of tried to step into his shoes, and it was a program that I had a lot of support from the Panamanian government. Because the canal had just been transferred back to Panama from the U.S. control, and I lived in the Panama Canal watershed, which meant that all of the rain that fell in the towns I lived and worked in went into the lake at the top of the canal, and that fresh water then was used. Yeah, Lago Gatun, yeah. I
have a map here. Show us on the map where the lake is.
So the lake is up here,
Okay.
and I lived a little bit to the south of that.
You're on the Atlantic side of that
on the Atlantic side of the mountain range.
Okay. Well, that's a lake that's formed by the Panama Canal.
It's formed by so several rivers were dammed when the Panama Canal was built back in the early part of the 20th century, and that lake is what feeds the canal.
So you were working with independently in a large geographical area, trying to cover a large geographical area, somewhat on your own, or pretty much on your own, or working with Panamanian.
Yeah, so I lived in a community, and a number of government agencies were working with that community to set up some demonstration farms where they would sort of teach the farmers in the area some new agricultural techniques that would allow them to farm plots of land more intensively, more organically, and use less, have to cut down less forest to farm. And that was sort of what the Panamanian government was interested in.
Well, you're a young man. You look even younger probably than you really are, and you arrived there and told the Panamanians, I'm going to help you grow stuff in the forest, even though I only studied history.
Right.
Did they laugh at you?
Well, some of them did, I'm sure. They were nice enough not to do it to my face. But
did you speak Spanish? Did they speak Spanish?
They spoke Spanish, and I'd had some Spanish in high school, and then had a pretty intensive 3-month training in Spanish before I swore in as a volunteer. Exactly. You know, and I think that's, to me, was one of the biggest learning experiences, making that transition from going there at first and thinking, man, I've got all these great new things I've read about. I've learned all these techniques in training, these great agricultural techniques. Let's go do it. You know, that was sort of my mindset at the beginning, right? And you know, a year into it, I sort of realized that you know, that approach wasn't really working. That we had these great demonstration farms set up, but the farmers weren't taking that knowledge and taking it from that demonstration farm back to their own plot of land, back to their own farm, and really applying it. And after sort of thinking about it for a while, and sort of with this growing realization that the problem was that I and also some of the government agencies were sort of teaching this in a very, you know, I have the knowledge, now I'm going to teach it to you sort of a way, rather than really doing it in a more process-oriented way and getting the farmers to really understand why this was important for them, and making them want to do it and have some ownership of it. And so during my second year as a volunteer, I sort of pretty radically changed the way I worked, and I stopped working with the demonstration farms exclusively. I did continue to work with them some, but I really focused on working with 5 different families who I had sort of said, okay, I'm going to work with families, and you know, and I'm going to sort of spend a lot more time with you and really listen to what your problems are and try to help you come up with a farm plan for how to address those problems. And hey, it turned out that a lot of the techniques that we've been doing in these demonstration farms may be able to help you, but the first step was for me to understand what their problems were and to go over that with them in detail and really get them excited about it and invested in that process.
That realization on your part is commendable as a volunteer, and it's the kind of thing that makes volunteers really feel satisfied in their work. From all the other volunteers I know, I can say that.
Right.
It's the kind of thing that Peace Corps provides to a person, the opportunity, as they say in the advertisements, to discover who you are and discover new aspects of your own self. That must have been very satisfying for you.
It was.
Make the realization, make the transition, and then start to see results.
Right.
Let's go back a little bit, though. For our taxpayers, is it somebody's fault that you were locked in for one whole year in a demonstration project that was not really being successful in meeting its goals?
Well, I don't know if
this is just your opinion.
I don't know if it's anyone's fault. I don't think so. I mean, I guess you know, my friends and I used to joke about how much reinvention of the wheel happened in Peace Corps, because you've got this high turnover of volunteers, you've got high turnover on the administrative end, you know, no one longer than 5 years. And at first I thought that wasn't efficient, that wasn't the best way, you know, but in the end, everyone knows how to build a wheel. And that's something valuable too, I think. And so, you know, maybe it wasn't efficient in terms of getting the most crops produced in that year, but in terms of getting me to understand and of getting other people to understand, getting farmers to sort of everyone to buy into this thing, you know, I think it's I don't view it as a wasted year. Okay, that's again insightful and reflective of your fine intellect. Did the Panamanians that you were working with come to embrace that knowledge? Some did, some didn't. You know, I had the fortune to extend for a third year in Panama to a different site, so I got to had a rare opportunity to go back in a year after, throughout the year after I left that first town I was in, and sort of check in and see how things were going without me. And it was a neat opportunity. In some ways it was heartening, and in some ways it was disheartening.
Sure.
Some of the families that I had worked with, didn't really continue to implement some of those techniques that we talked about, and some of them did. Some of them took off and sort of ran with these in these incredibly creative ways of mixing different crops and mixing trees and crops, ways that I could never have thought of.
Yeah.
But they just sort of, all they needed was that seed of an idea, and once they got that, they just ran with it. And they're just, they have these amazing farms now, and so that's really that was heartening.
Yeah. I'd like to explore this third year with you
Yeah.
now. In our conversation before the show began, it was very interesting, and I'd like to share with our audience an aspect of service above and beyond typical Peace Corps service. Tell me, you have a special organization now, if you can kind of lead us down the garden path from your second through your third
Okay.
year, and how that ties in with what you're doing today.
So, at the end of my 2 years, or as it was approaching the end of my 2 years, one of the Peace Corps staff people, my boss, the associate Peace Corps director who was in charge of my program, asked if I might be interested in staying a third year. He had this community, this indigenous community of the Wonan indigenous people, which are one of Panama's 7 indigenous groups. This community had been requesting a volunteer for a long time, but it was pretty remote. He didn't want to send a new volunteer out to that site alone, but he had a new volunteer who he was going to send out there, and then he thought that I might be able to go out there too, and we would work as a team. I would be there for a year, and this other volunteer would sort of continue. The community was called Rio Hondo, and it was pretty remote. It was about a 7 to 8 hour boat trip in a dugout canoe, motorized dugout canoe, down a river, and then east along the Pacific coast, and then up another river.
Now, on our map, you showed me an area by lake or lago.
So it's to the south of Lago Baiano, and
on the other side of the mountain
on
range.
the other side of the mountain range, the other side of the Mahe mountain range. So
Pacific side.
the Pacific side, and so there's a few communities nestled in between the Mahe mountain range to the north and the Pacific Ocean to the south. Really isolated. The Inter-American Highway, which sort of bisects Panama, is to the north of the mountain range, and so they're cut off from the mountain range, the Inter-American Highway by the mountain range, and the only access is by boat.
Without going into a lot of the detail, the indigenous people of Central America are all related, or they're related probably in ancient history?
Sure, I mean, I think probably we're all related when you get back far enough. But
most of the Americas have this dichotomy of population,
yes,
and indigenous people, and then people of European ancestry brought in by the conquistadors, the Spanish.
Exactly, and the mixes are different in different countries throughout the Americas. Bolivia has I think a greater indigenous population than a non-indigenous population. Guatemala has a fairly high indigenous population relative to its Latino population. Panama, that's not really the case. Panama's total indigenous population is less than 10% of its entire population, less than 300,000 indigenous to about 3 million Panamanians. The Wonan, there's about 7,000 Wonan in Panama as of the last census.
And so your director asked you to get involved with them?
And I thought this was I wasn't sure, and then I went and visited the community, and I was sold in an instant. I got off the boat, and I thought, oh my, this is the most beautiful place I've ever been, and these people are. I'd had the fortune to meet some of the Wonan earlier, and I was really impressed with them, sort of how open and friendly they were, and they just seemed like a really very engaging people in general. And the town was a primary forest coming right down to my doorstep. Macaws, toucans flying overhead every morning and every afternoon. Howler monkeys in the forest.
Jungle,
yes,
rainforest.
Just you're everything you would imagine from a tropical
Did they
rainforest.
know Americans before you?
They had there had been some missionaries who had worked with them, not with this particular community, but they had some positive contacts with Americans in the past, and so they had sort of a high. They wanted some gringos to come live with them.
Welcomed you.
Exactly.
To some degree.
Yeah.
And were you going to be doing the same kind of?
I was going to be doing the same sort of work, although as it turned out, what I ended up doing was sort of more basic rural community development. So sort of helping the community figure out what its needs and wants were, and what its resources were, and how it could apply those resources to achieve what it wanted. So I did a little of this farming and agroforestry stuff as part of that, but it was on a sort of more basic level.
Again, for our audience, the idea of an American coming in to tell people who have lived in an area for centuries, no doubt, here's what you need to do to improve your life,
Right.
can be off-putting.
Yes.
Did they embrace you? Give us a little idea.
Well, they did embrace me, and I think
how you started and inserted yourself.
I think as compared to the first place I lived, where it was really the Panamanian government requesting a volunteer to work with this community and the community sort of accepting it, this community had really petitioned hard to Peace Corps to get a volunteer, and so they really wanted a Peace Corps volunteer. And I think in part for the cultural exchange, and in part the idea that here was someone who could help them. I think there was there's some animosity between indigenous peoples and the European, the Latino people in the Americas and in Panama, and
so they formulated their parameter of what help should be or could be for them.
No, they hadn't formulated that idea. They sort of knew that they needed help with some different things. They wanted to
life could be different
get a health center. They wanted to figure out how to improve some of their crops. They wanted to figure out how to secure their lands. They knew they sort of wanted some things in this area, but they didn't have them real specific.
Well, a year to accomplish that is not very long.
No, it wasn't, and it was. I think that after coming off of a very successful 2 years in this other site, I felt very sort of confident in my abilities, in terms of the agricultural stuff and my ability to go into a community and adjust. And it was hard at first.
Yeah. Well, in the 5 minutes or so that we have left, I'd like to explore now really what transpired. You had some success there, is that?
I had some success there.
They embraced you.
Yes.
They
it was
listened to your ideas and they worked hard to implement them.
Yeah, and I don't know if there was that much that was really accomplished, except for the idea that here are some ideas, and I guess the door is still open to see where they end up taking those ideas down the road.
So your work wasn't so much hoeing rows for crops, but it was hoeing the ability to brainstorm, perhaps.
I think so.
What could we do as a community to get the ball rolling?
And helping them think about how to approach problems, I guess. So helping them to sort of identify what it was that they wanted. What level of development did they want? Did they wanted a health center? Did that mean that were they willing to accept building a road and all of the good and bad that came with that also? Or did they want a sort of a more limited version of that? And sort of helping them think through the consequences of different choices also.
Did you go through formal exchanges of these kinds of positive and negatives?
Yeah, we had a series of meetings in the first 3 or 4 months.
Any modern game techniques to?
No, and it was interesting because they're not a very literate society, and so we ended up doing it all through pictures. So we sort of had them sort of talk about the things they wanted and had them draw these pictures, and then sort of went through this process of arranging the pictures on the board in terms of prioritizing what they wanted us to help them work on in that year. It was neat.
How can the people of Hawaii help them and help you now?
Sure. Please. So I've continued to work with the Wonan through an organization that I founded after I returned from my Peace Corps service. The organization is called Native Future.
Native Future?
Native Future. We're a Hawaii nonprofit organization, 501c3. We've been around for about almost 5 years now, I guess. And we're all volunteer, so just slowly building up little by little. And our principal mission at this time is to help 3 Wonan communities, including the one I lived in, get legal title to their lands. The biggest problem they face, and the sort of easiest one for them to identify, was they wanted title to their lands. It's something that I couldn't really work on as a volunteer because it was a little bit too political.
Sure.
And when I came back to the States, I thought, this is something that I can work on now and have the contacts and have the ability to do something. And the basic problem is that they live a they live a life not that different than their ancestors have for generations, farming plantains and bananas, gathering fruits and medicinal plants, fishing, hunting small game, making some of these handcrafts to sell, these baskets and little carvings out of nuts and wood. But all of that depends very much on the forests that they live in, which are these just amazing untouched forests. But they really use those forests for a variety of different things, whether it's just as a place to hunt or to fish, whether it's to gather some materials for their house, medicinal plants. And all of that is sort of threatened by these cattle ranchers who are coming in and crossing into their lands.
So people that our viewers who might want to help out Native Future, your organization, your foundation, your charitable organization, they can donate
find us,
money, they can donate other things,
Yeah, you can find us on the web at nativefuture.org.
Nativefuture.org, and on your screen you'll see the address. That's the best way for them to contact you?
That's the best way for them to contact us, and they can see a variety of different ways to help on our webpage.
The idea of spanning the ocean like that is still must be very satisfying for you.
It is. It's great to feel like I'm still involved in people's lives there.
Well, we appreciate your insight, Zach. I think that you're a fine example of what Peace Corps can mean to people and what Peace Corps does to people, to be able to take on the idea of having a foundation such as Native Future. We appreciate the sharing of the land. And to our viewers, thank you very much for coming again one more time to bring the world home. We hope that you'll join us again next week for another edition. Our production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers exposes viewers to the life and times of volunteers. And again, thank you very much, Zach.
Thank you.